Be seated, please. We have this dilemma every Christmas, don't we? What do you get for the guy who has everything? That was Naaman. Naaman had everything. He had wealth, power, fame. He was rich. And he had everything. Sadly, everything included leprosy. Naaman was not happy with this, and he wanted something done. And we read the story. You get the idea of the story. There is more to the story, and I'm going to say a little bit about that in a few minutes, but I want you to go home and read the story in the Bible. It's a good idea to read the Bible. Give me some water, please. It's a good idea to read the Bible on occasion, and I hope you will read this story because it's a really good story. Naaman finally is cured of his leprosy, but not before going through all the stuff that's in the reading for today. And one of the things is that there are 8 people, count them, 8 people who are involved in Naaman's salvation, in his cure. Back then, leprosy was a bad thing, and you couldn't go around anybody who had it, and they couldn't go around anybody who didn't have it, and it was just all around a bad deal. And so Naaman, wanting to have himself cured, thank you, Bob, my brother, a great guy. Wanting to have a cure for himself, probably moped around the house. This is what I do. When I get a hangnail or a sniffle, oh. My wife loses a limb and goes about cooking dinner with the other one, you know. Not me. And so the least powerful person in the entire story, and maybe in the whole world, is the first one to take action. A slave girl who happened to be from Israel. Now, she was a slave, she was a girl, and she was from Israel. Strike 3, you're out. Because they were in the country of Aram. And Naaman was Aram's king. Naaman was Aram's general. Most greatest army general ever, maybe in the whole wide world. And this slave girl, who wasn't even his slave, but his wife's slave, went to her mistress and said, you know, if only my Lord could go see the man of God who lives in Samaria. Now, I know you were here last week, and some of you were here last year. I know you were here last week, and you heard me say that Samaria was the northern part of the northern kingdom. But in the days of Naaman, the Samaritans had not had the opportunity to become apostates like they had by the time of Jesus, so don't worry about that. So Elisha, the man of God, lived in Samaria, and this slave girl says to her mistress, if only my Lord could go see the man of God. Well, the mistress goes and tells her husband, Naaman, about this. And he decides to go. Now, there must have been a scribal gloss in here, because when my wife tells me to do something, it might happen someday, but it probably ain't happening today. Now, if my mom tells me something, am I right? My mom tells me something, I do it right away. But if my wife tells me, I don't know. So finally, Naaman comes to his senses, and he decides to go see Elisha. He goes to his boss, the king, and who could easily have said, you know what, Naaman, you have leprosy, why don't you just retire? But Naaman has won a lot of battles for this guy. So he writes this letter to the king of Israel saying, here is my servant Naaman. Surely you can cure him of his leprosy. And the king of Israel says, what, is this guy trying to pick a fight with me? This was a fragile peace between Aram and Israel. And so the king of Israel was rightly perturbed. Well, it doesn't make any difference because Elisha hears about this dust up and says, just send him over to me. So Naaman, who has 1,000 pounds of silver and 150 pounds of gold, herbs and spices, 10 sets of garments, chariots and horses a half a mile long, arrives at the house of Elisha, which is this little bitty shack out in the boonies. And here comes Naaman on his chariot. The horses are throwing their heads and their tails and their manes and all that kind of, whoa, big fella. And here comes Naaman and says, here I am, give me what I deserve. Well, you and I might say you've already got what you deserve. But Elisha is unimpressed and sends the second least powerful person in the whole story out to talk to Naaman. Elisha's houseboy goes out and talks to Naaman and says, my boss says, go down to the Jordan River and wash 7 times and everything will be fine. Thank you very much. Bye. And of course, Naaman is livid. Naaman is beside himself with anger. He says, surely he would have come out and called on the name of the Lord his God and waved his hands around and said, Gazi, Gazi, or abracadabra, or whatever. But he sends me this houseboy. Well, you know how the story goes. Eventually he goes down to the Jordan. But the word Jordan means descender. It means something that goes down. And it's in a deep valley. And this guy comes from Aram, where there are beautiful rivers, and surely I could have washed in one of those. So he's sent off to do this sort of self-serve miracle in this third-rate river, and he washes and is clean. He finally gets it. Now, there's that other thing, but he finally gets it. He finally gets it. And we know this because he goes back to Elisha's house, not in our reading. This is why I want you to read the story. He goes back to Elisha's house, and he stands in front of Elisha's house this way and asks Elisha for permission to thank him. That might be a little more like it. He asks Elisha for permission to make now an offering. Not a bribe. 1,000 pounds of silver and 150 pounds of gold were not a bribe. I mean, they were supposed to be a bribe or payment or something. I mean, if you go down to MD Anderson, they're not going to ask you for an offering. And Naaman gets it. He says, now I know there is no God but the God of Israel. And are you ready for this? He loads up his chariots with dirt. Dirt. He loads up his chariots with dirt and takes it back with him to Aram and spreads it out on his yard so that he can go out and on Israelite soil give thanks to the God of Israel. I get that. I understand that. I had a friend when I lived in Germany. I had a friend who was from Texas, like me, and he was in Germany in the army, like I was, and he had brought with him a big baggie full of dirt from Fort Hood, where he had been stationed. Fort Hood has a lot of dirt. He had been stationed at Fort Hood, and he took a baggie full of dirt with him to Germany. And when his wife went into the hospital to give birth to their daughter, what did he do? He took that dirt, that bag of dirt, and put it under her bed where she was delivering this child so that his daughter could be born on Texas soil. So I get it. I understand why Naaman did that. I had a guy do the same thing in my presence. I understand that. He got it. He figured it out. That there's something greater going on here than my greatness. Paul says to the Galatians, look out if you think you're such a much. Don't bring yourself off as being better than you are. The disciples get it too, eventually. Jesus sends them out 2 by 2. He sends them out they're the kind of the front men, and they go to his advanced team, to all the towns where he's going to go, and he gives them their instructions. And I don't know if you noticed this, but their instructions are the same no matter what town they go to, and no matter what the reaction of that town is. Their instructions are the same. If you go to a town and they receive you, you do this and this and this. Eat, don't be high maintenance. Eat what they give you. Don't move around, blah, 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 blah. And say, the kingdom of God has come near. If you go to a town, on the other hand, and they do not receive you, then you do this and this and this. And then you say, the kingdom of God has come near. In other words, it doesn't matter for you, it does not matter what their reaction is. You let somebody else take care of that. You go and preach the kingdom of God. That's what you need to do, says Jesus. Well, the disciples come back and they're just wide-eyed. And they say, Lord, in your name, even the demons are subject to us. And Jesus, yeah, I know. The Greek, by the way, where it says, Lord, in your name, even the demons submit to us. He said, I watched Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. In Greek, it says, I was watching Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. The was watching, the tense of that verb says, I was doing that while you were gone. I was watching when demons came out of innocent people, when people who did not know the good news had the good news preached to them, when the poor had food to eat, and when the sick were made well again. I watched Satan, who can't stand such things, I was watching Satan fall from heaven. And what did you do? You told them that the kingdom of God had come near, and how true that was. I know, because I was watching it. I was standing here watching it. If you have ever taught Sunday school, if you have ever been to Vacation Bible School, especially as an adult, if you have ever seen kids do summer Bible reading thing, you know exactly what Jesus was talking about. Because you have seen kids sing and dance and jump and joy and rejoice in the fact that their names are written in heaven. Do you see? Jesus says, nevertheless, don't rejoice that the spirits submit to you. Rejoice that your name is written in heaven, because it is. Sisters and brothers, beloved, your names are written in heaven. You don't understand what a joy and a blessing you are to the world, probably. You probably don't understand. Nancy gave a recipe to my wife. Maybe I'm not supposed to tell this, but she gave a recipe to my wife And my wife made that recipe for St. John's La Porte. They've got breakfast breads. And she used that recipe to make some breakfast bread. And those people at St. John's in La Porte, when they get hold of that bread, they will be transported into heaven. I know, because I ate some for breakfast this morning. They will be transported into a gastronomic heaven. That wasn't why Nancy gave Beth that recipe, but it's true. Don't rejoice that the spirits submit to you. Rejoice that you are a blessing to the entire world. Do you see? You are. You, the ones who are said, Joy, you are. Sandra, you are. Eldon, you are. Tom, you are a blessing to the entire world, and your names are written in heaven. See, Naaman finally got it. And the disciples finally got it. We know that the disciples finally got it because they passed it on to somebody else. And every single time you say a prayer for a sick person, every single time you give a hungry person something to eat, every single time you welcome a stranger, every single time you invite someone who is desperate for a warm and loving community to be part of this one, every one of those times, Jesus sees Satan falling from heaven like a flash of lightning. Every time. You do good work. I know you do. I watch you. I come to your homes sometimes. I was at a house blessing yesterday. I had the great joy of blessing a house yesterday. And you do fabulous work. But don't rest on your laurels, my daddy used to say. We have more work to do. We can rejoice. We can rejoice in the goodness with which God has blessed us. And God has blessed us tremendously. But you, go preach the kingdom of God.